So, without further ado, I'm very honored, very excited to introduce our visiting artists. So, Megan Wimberly and Morgan Bucket. Or, excuse me, Booker. I apologize. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so like Eileen said, I'm Megan, and this is Morgan.
And I'm Morgan.
And I'm the founder of Cowgirl Artists of America, and Morgan is on our advisory board, and we are both co-chairs for this first annual, by the way, show of women's work. And we're going to just tell you a little bit about our work. So I'm a contemporary Western and wildlife artist. My work is focused on wildlife primarily, but I also do work featuring women in the West, so a lot of cowgirls and the work that they do. This is a style that I've developed over the last 9 years, and if you go to my Instagram, you can scroll way back and you can see how I developed this style over the course of the last 9 years. But obviously I really like to play with color. The thing about my wildlife art is that there's always a story behind it. So my work is always about connection. I really believe in our connection with one another and our connection with our natural world. And so what I always like to tell Western folks is that, you know, the mama cow out in the pasture produces the same hormones when she nurses her baby as any woman here would when she nurses hers. And so I think that we have this connection with animals that we forget about, that we all experience fear, we experience connection with one another. And bison are a reoccurring image in my work. I feel like bison often for me represent a strength and a wisdom. You know, bison were hunted almost to the point of extinction purposefully in order to try to get the upper hand with indigenous communities, but they were almost totally wiped out. So their story is innately a story of resilience. And you can go to the next slide. So this is another one of my pieces. These legs may look familiar to you tomorrow if you come, because these are the legs of my cousin Morgan, a different Morgan, and she's who I teamed up with for women's work. And so this is a story about connection, and if you're a horse person, you might recognize the posture of this horse. They've been roping, they've been working. They're done now. They're done working. It's been a good day. I could not paint all of her because she's in fact so relaxed that she's texting, which was not going to look great in my painting. But this horse, he's got his head dropped. He's walking slowly. He's got his ears forward. And so this is this story of the connection of them, and they're both at ease. So again, all of the paintings that I have, they have a story behind them. And so you can get ideas from the title, but also a lot of times I talk about the different stories. I don't have a picture of it, but there is a bison that I painted, and I really struggled with naming it. Normally as I'm painting, the story behind the image develops, and because I paint very intuitively, and it's kind of a conversation. I don't know where I'm going most of the time. And I got done with this bison, and I could not name it, and I just stuck it there in my living room for a month. And I just was like, I don't know what I'm supposed to name this piece. And I started thinking, okay, what are the things that came up for me painting it? And it was that the bison had experienced a lot of hardship. Bison live rugged, tough lives, you know, especially out there like in the north where they're experiencing these rugged winters. And so the background was dark, shadowy, and then the bison was very vibrant. And so it was the story about this animal who had come out of a lot of things, come out on the other side wiser and stronger. I realized it was a self-portrait. But I didn't even make that connection while I was painting it. So every piece has a story behind it, and that always focuses on our connection, which is going to come up again. But
we're going to talk a lot about storytelling. Are you done?
And connection, yes.
Yes. So I got to see Joy Harjo last night in my hometown at our library, and she talked about the story matrix, and I just thought about this weekend's experience. We have 54 artists from Boston to California, women like Megan and I who have a connection to agriculture and the ranching industry, and women who have never set foot on dirt before, and everything in between. And just expanding these stories of these women throughout the country and bringing all of this together is just a web of stories that could take us years to unpack, and it's such a pleasure to be part of. I build custom cowboy boots, which is not something you might think of as an artist, and I think that is something that's changing in our, I'll be generous and say industry. Cowboy boots are a uniquely American craft. It's existed for about 150 years, and it's kind of this tornado of cultures that met. My mentor is here, and she'll say Kansas. There's some debate whether it might be Kansas or Oklahoma or maybe even Texas, which is probably not the case. And the Wellington boots came from Northern Europe, and Spanish riding boots came from Southern Europe and really Middle Asia, and it have a connection to Mongolian horse culture. And so these things kind of came together in a tornado to create what we know as a cowboy boot. Another endless matrix of stories that could go on for years. I have been making cowboy boots for about 10 years and came to this much later in life, but it grew up as a 7th generation rancher in Texas and always had these beautiful pieces of traditional gear, cowboy hats, saddles, cowboy boots, all of these things that my family invested in to keep and enjoy for a really long time. And I was actually a fly fishing guide whenever I got into cowboy boots, and this was during the recession, and I was not working as much as I needed to and started playing with leather a little bit. And I think I saw a picture of Lisa's boots maybe and saw the opportunity to go to shoe school, and it was just like, oh my gosh, who knew this was an option? And within the first day, I knew it was exactly for me. It filled my body and my mind as this really unique combination of math and creativity and brute force to create this usable piece of art. And I have been in love ever since. This was just a couple of pictures of my connection to the ranching industry. This is me on a horse at 10 days old. And so this was something I could never escape, and I tried really, really hard and did a big swing, but I'm back and just so thrilled to be here collecting these stories and sharing these stories about our work. Many people say that there's over 300 steps in making a pair of boots. People say different numbers. I have not counted myself. It is so many different types of tasks and different types of work. This is the back side of some panels for boot tops, and I just thought it was so beautiful as a piece of art in this way. But all of these pieces were cut and the leather was thinned, which is called skiving, and reattached, and then the pieces that were cut out were reattached, and then a lining goes onto that, and it was sewn. And so just sewing these tops were over 30 hours, and so it's really labor-intensive work, and there's so many opportunities for failure, but the highs of success are really what keep me coming back. And so this is the finished product. These are called Cosmic Cowboy, and these were based on a design of a Navajo silversmith, Alvin Yellowhorse, who I'm totally obsessed with. And one of my friends actually got me one of his pieces, so you can see that inspiration up close. And I live in the West, and I spend a lot of time in wilderness areas, and just like this connection to space and thinking about the world bigger than us was really a great theme to focus on and was really a delightful process.
So, let me make sure
CGA.
Yeah. So, I also grew up around ranching, and not in the same way as Morgan. My mom was a horse trainer and she was an artist. And I grew up around all these really talented, skilled women. My great-grandma, she's called Grandma Smokey. I don't actually even know if I know what her real name is, but she trained a Mustang when she was 85. And in 2018, I went to a very prestigious Western art show. It was beautiful. Every piece was incredible. But as I walked through the show and I looked at the bios and I saw the pictures, one thing became very apparent. There were not many women. It was so astounding, the difference that I had to buy a catalog, and I actually crunched the numbers, and it was only about 9% female representation in this show of around 95 artists. And I wondered, where were the women? Because I grew up with those women. I know that they exist. I know we have incredibly skilled women. And within the artwork itself, I also noticed that women were severely underrepresented. I did not see stories of my Grandma Smokey or my mom or my cousin represented in the work. In fact, most of the time that women were represented, they were young, taking care of a child, cooking, or they were a beautiful face. And while women can do all of those things, there is so much more that they do. And so again, the pandemic, it did some good things for us because we had some downtime. And I'd had this idea for Cowgirl Artists of America kind of percolating in my brain. And so in 2018, I started thinking maybe I should do this, but I was really focused on my art. And I started thinking maybe I don't know. And so I decided to ask my partner, Pete, and I thought he was going to say, no, stay focused on your work. And he was like, I think that's a wonderful idea, but don't let it distract you from your artwork. And so I followed half of his advice because I threw myself very heavily into Cowgirl Artists of America. It was founded on 4 core beliefs: community, education, collaboration, and promotion. So the issues with women's representation are incredibly complex. It's easy for us to want to say it is this one reason. And yeah, it's probably that reason, but it's 10 other reasons too. And how do we address all of those reasons? So for example, unfortunately, one of the worst reasons that we've heard is a group might say, well, there's no women here because they are not working at the same level as men. And y'all can fill in the blank.
Right answer.
It's not true, right? It is absolutely not true. So for signature membership, our basic level, we let anybody in. We don't jury it because we want to get started at the ground level, helping women at the very beginning so they aren't suddenly having success and thinking, oh, I didn't know I should get a contract, or oh, I didn't know how to file taxes. So we want to get our hands on them very early. But we also think it's important to have standards with the art because you know that there are beginner artists and there are artists who have developed their skill and their craft. And so with signature membership, it is a juried process. It is one of the hardest jurying process that I'm aware of, and it gets harder, I think, every time because we continue to refine what it means. But our goal is to have shows and to have like the signature membership where nobody can go and look at that page and ever again think women are not working at this level. So I started that, and we got pretty lucky. I got an email, rant and tip. People get so busy, and if you email somebody with a good thing and they don't respond, please email them again. Thank you, Morgan, for following back up with me, because I get this email from Morgan, which I was very busy and did not reply to, and I'm going to let her tell her
And I followed
side.
up. First, I'll say that Jill, who's in the middle of this photo,
Yes.
also has a piece in this exhibition. She is a silversmith at the highest level, and she built a Minaudier out of sterling, and it is just a sight to behold. And a Minaudier is a small purse. It's beyond exceptional. Allison and I are going to fight over it and go to the poorhouse.
I've been walking around the museum with it, slowly acting like it's mine. I need to polish my fingerprints off.
Okay, you can. So I came to Megan from a different group, the Idaho Cowgirl Congress. And so I am a traditional artist and live in the state of Idaho. And Idaho has a really strong arts program, which I'm so thankful to be a part of. And Stephen Hatcher, who runs the traditional arts program, gathers like people together every year. And so he started with the Saddle Summit, and there was like the Rawhide Braiding Rendezvous or something like that. And then at all of these gatherings, there would be 25 dudes and 3 ladies. And so he's like, there are enough women that I think we need to have our own event. And so he gathered, this was the first time we got together, this really amazing group of women who are silversmith saddle makers. Nancy, who is in this black jacket, was in the New York Times today about her saddle making. And it's just so exceptional to see her story in the biggest audience there is. And I cried on the plane this morning. I was so proud of her. And so, a gun engraver, several boot makers, all of these people who came together to share our experiences. And we didn't really know what was going to happen because our mediums are so different. But we work in isolation for the most part. We all have a connection to agriculture and the ranching community in some part. And it was like seeing your long lost sisters. And we just started talking, and we stayed up till 2 o'clock in the morning every night. And it was an exceptional group. And we loved each other so much that we were like, we have to keep doing this. And so we considered forming a 501c3, and then a lot of work kept falling on me as these things go. as you all know, I'm sure. And so when I heard about CGA from one of our members of the Idaho Cowgirl Congress, and she's like, oh, let's reach out to them and see what happens. So I reached out to Megan, and I'm like, you need to include traditional artists in this group. And we are doing the same high level of work, and though our medium is different, it's still a canvas to tell a story and has these strong traditions to the places where we grew up. And so I sent Megan 2 emails, and here we are 3 or 4 years later, and we talk every day and text 30 times a day. Right now it's a whole lot.
Yeah.
Don't cry.
I could not, honestly, it could not be a better partnership, and I think that was one of the things too, is that with women's groups, and we go to a lot of these women's organizations, be prepared to be confused because they all sound the same. Cowgirl Artists of America, Art of the Cowgirl Gathering, all of the cowgirl things, we go to them, and I guarantee you every single time that somebody's talking, they always say, all ships rise together. And that's the thing that sets women apart from traditionally. Obviously, we're not going to paint with a broad brush, but typically women are so community oriented. And so while the arts have been traditionally very male dominated, it was very secretive, it was exclusive, you had to get in with the person to learn. Women are like, come, Lisa over there, come to my shop and learn. Morgan getting ready to teach people, you know, like this organization all the time we volunteer. Women we want to be in a sisterhood with each other. We want to help each other grow, because when we help one artist, we help all artists.
Absolutely. Let's see. Yeah, you go. Oh, so we're just moving on to women's work.
Okay.
Oh, and this, yeah, so this is the Cowgirl Gathering, which is in Fort Worth.
Yeah.
This is one of the events that Cowgirl Artists of America participates in and puts on a show there. And that's, yeah, as Megan said, there's all of these acronyms now of these groups all over the country, and they have a slightly different twist here and there, and you could say the same about women's work this weekend. But we're all together, and we go to the ones where we can, and it's just a delight to get to share our work and our experiences with each other, and continue to rise all ships, as Megan said. So here are some statistics that we won't read to you, but you can read on your own, and they're really the basis for women's work, which I'll let Megan start talking about.
Yeah, so like I said, within the exhibition that I went to, and this is common, I don't ever want anybody to feel like I'm picking on them, because I do think that oftentimes we are just drawing from the same well. It's not something people are doing consciously about leaving people out, but so if you leave with only one thing today, please leave with this. Pay attention. When you go into a show, when you go into a gallery, when you see a show promoted, when you see a magazine, pay attention to how many women are there, how many indigenous artists, how many people of color there are, because when there are stories that aren't being told, there are important parts being left out. So pay attention, how many like non-white, non-male people are there, because primarily that's what we're seeing as artists. And so, I mean, that's showing right here. But within this show, I was looking at, like I said, there was hardly any women. In fact, wildlife far outnumbered women. And it just made me so sad. There was, of the women in this particular show, actually I think I looked at it again a couple years later, there were only 2 women with horses, and only 1 was she not with a man. And I just think about the women I grew up with, I'm sure the women you grew up with, I mean, anybody in this industry knows that women are out there. They are doing every single thing that a man is doing, and often taking care of kids and cooking dinner at the end of the day. And so we have got to celebrate these stories. So women's work, I had the idea originally, and it's the stereotypical women's work, you know, like we hear that term, and my poor dad, he hasn't known I'm throwing him under the bus, but he was a little guy, so don't judge him too harshly, but he came in and he had 3 sisters, and my grandma tells a story that he came in and he told them to make him lunch, and they were like, we're not making you lunch. And so he went over to my grandma and he said, Mom, tell those girls to make me a sandwich. And she was like, oh, we gotta have a conversation. But like, that's the idea, is that women's work, A, is relegated to certain jobs, and that men aren't allowed to do it. That's women's work. The other idea is that women's work can't be these other things. And so the whole notion of this women's work exhibit is like, we want to celebrate that women raise kids, and we want to celebrate that they cook dinner. We also want to celebrate that they're incredible horse trainers, that they are farriers, that they doctor cattle, they're pickup women at rodeos. We want to show the full story, because ultimately the West is a vibrant and colorful space, both in landscape and animals and people. It is diverse, and we want to tell the diverse story, the reality of the situation, and to celebrate all of those things. So originally the idea was to do a solo show for myself. I had the idea again in 2018, and after I started CGA, it expanded my my idea for what the show could be. I think maybe you can go to the next slide too.
Yeah, there's a few.
It expanded my idea for what this show could be, and I'm so grateful that I did, because it would have been a fun little show for myself. What Morgan and I have put together is phenomenal. It is so cool, because we've done two really interesting things, and that is, one, we've helped women to team up with women on working ranches or in the Western industry. So when you go to this show, this is a real woman that Crystal Orlando went out and shadowed and took pictures and learned about the work that she does on her ranch.
And I just want to point out, for those of you who did not see this is graphite. This
is not a photo.
Just so exceptional. Crystal's work is amazing.
And so we go back to the idea of collaboration. How can we help more ships rise? What about all these women in the industry? And so if you look at the catalog, you're going to see the artist's name, and then you're going to see their ranch partner. And there's another special thing which we'll talk about in a second, but I don't want to jump ahead. But I think we have got 3
Yeah, we have it.
slides.
Yeah, you can go ahead.
You should talk about this one, because you're the traditional artist.
Yeah, so this is Claire, who is obviously a leather worker and budding silversmith, and I love this piece. She started out as a saddle maker and is a really exceptional saddle maker. She apprenticed with the best of the best in Washington State, and she realized that she enjoyed making handbags more and made more money making handbags, and so she's employing these techniques used to build a tool for the range to create this really uniquely feminine product. And I love that with Claire's bag and then Jill's bag as well. So to make all of this happen, there were all of these ideas circulating. And so we, I think over 1,000 pieces of art were submitted for this show. And artists submitted work that they had already created, and when accepted would be creating new work for this show. So after the artists were juried in, we worked to partner the women with ranchers, and that was a really unique process in itself, and a whole different kind of jurying process. It was twice the work, because we were trying to find ranchers, and someone lives in Denver and needs a rancher, and so we have to start calling friends and family and reach out to people to try to find someone kind of regionally appropriate to reach out with them. And then I guess I don't know a percentage of how many women were their own ranchers. It's probably 20%.
I would say, percentage-wise, I don't know, but I think there's maybe 4 to 5
Oh,
women
okay,
that
less than I thought.
They could. So some of the artists are women on ranches, and they could partner with themselves to showcase the work on the ranch. The other cool thing about this, and it started out as a declared mission of the show, but I think I've kind of stepped it back because it's such a complex show already. But Morgan and I both, this idea of reconnecting people with where their food comes from is so important, because as we continue to get more urbanized, people just don't know, like there's kids that don't know that a chicken nugget is from a chicken, and that's so important all the way around, no matter if you eat meat or you don't eat meat, like to understand where our food is coming from. And so there were several artists who do not have a ranching or an agricultural background that we were able to team up with women, and it gave this opportunity for these women to go out and actually see the work that they are not innately connected to.
I think,
yeah. So the next this piece.
Y'all are gonna die.
Every time I see this work, I literally get chills. I have to rub them away. So the second really unique aspect of this show, when I walked around that show that I went to that was inspiration for all of this, the other thing that I noticed is that there were not any Indigenous women. And if they might have been portrayed in the art, rarely, but they were not the artists. And if you've been to a Western art show, I think 50% is a good honest estimate of how much portrays Indigenous themes. And we think about this as these are very intimate stories that are being shared, but they're being shared from the outside. They're not being shared from the people who those stories belong to, who have that intimate connection and knowledge. And of course, there's ways to ethically tell those stories and to gather that information. But for this show, it was very important to us that any culturally relevant Indigenous theme, whether it was traditional work or like relevant to their specific culture, that Indigenous women were the only ones allowed to portray that. So you're not going to come in and see a painting of Indigenous women making a skirt or a blanket. You're not going to see that because the Indigenous women are the only ones allowed to create that so that they can share their own stories. Essentially the idea was we want to be a platform for authentic stories to be shared. Now, one thing just going forward is that we specified, because Indigenous women are often in agriculture, and so we did add for next year kind of a clarification that, non-Indigenous people you can partner with a ranch with an Indigenous woman, because that caused some confusion for people. We want to celebrate Indigenous women in all of their capacities, but as far as those cultural things, that's coming from the people innately connected with this. This is Beverly Bear King Moran, and I am in love with this piece. It is absolutely incredible. When you go, you can kind of see in these up close, these tiny little beads. And she said that if she made this for an actual mask, so this is a war mask, and if she made it for, if she made it for actual use, not for the show, she would use bigger beads. But for this show, she used these tiny little beads, and it's amazing. And also, Allison said when she came in, Beverly came with her sister, and she kept smelling the leather because part of the process was to smoke the leather to get the color that they wanted. This piece will blow your mind.
Yeah, and they did tan the leather themselves as well. It's traditional brain tan leather. So we have 5 tribes represented, which we're excited that they're here bringing their own work, and are really glad to have made a movement in the right direction in Indigenous representation.
And both in traditional art forms like this, but also in sculpture. And we've got a Choctaw artist who did a mosaic, so that they're not limited to one thing. And they could also partner with the ranch if that was their in fact, Chesney Sevier, she is a working cowgirl, and so she portrayed, I can't remember if it was her or her daughter.
I think it was her daughter. So we have 3 generations of one Indigenous family who are represented in this show. Yeah. And Jackie Sevier, who is Chesney's mom, was on the Cowgirl Artists of America podcast that came out last month, I think.
A couple weeks ago.
And I highly recommend listening to it. Her story and her upbringing, I think she grew up one of 13 girls in her family, and they're all artists in different ways, and just all of these endless layers of connection of how women are creating this work. It was fascinating, and we could talk about it for days, and we'll be talking about it for days. Okay, go ahead. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the ranch partnerships. This is my pair of boots that I'm exhibiting, and I started thinking about my generations of storytelling to share. I grew up on one of the largest ranches in Texas, which my dad is the foreman of, and the owner of the ranch is a woman, which everyone always assumes it's a man, and she is a lady, and she has been documenting the unique tricultural heritage of the Texas coastal bend for over 50 years. That's Black, Hispanic, and Eastern European with a touch of Irish. And so I was looking for a photo of the prairie that I was documenting in this pair of boots to share, and I couldn't find one in my files, but I was just Googling Miss Louise and found this photo from 1980, before I was born, of the same place that still looks the same, and things are still happening that might look the same, but are different. And so when you come and see the show, I can talk more about my pair of boots. But I wanted to talk about the ranch partnerships a little bit and these really intimate interactions. So my work really focused on the importance of conservation and ranching. And that's something I have worked in conservation myself, and the ranch that I grew up on has been working in conservation for about 50 years. And my sister is a full-time rancher on this ranch now, and so she was my ranch partner, and we didn't want to do horses because you don't get to ride horses that often on a ranch. I mean, when you're working cattle, that's the most romantic part, but it doesn't happen every day. You have to do a lot of really crappy jobs. And so we're trying to think of something beautiful and unique and focused on this conservation project. And I think that's a really special part of this overall story, is these stories vary from place to place and region, and especially in traditional work, you're going to see a lot of variation in aesthetics based on location. And this boot is more representative of Oklahoma, where I apprenticed with Lisa Sorrell, but is not, might look different if it was in Colorado or in Idaho or anywhere else. And there's just these endless layers of stories that we can tell about all of our pieces, and our catalog does have a story from the artist as well as information from the ranch partner or tribe included. And so you really get this deep richness of storytelling and just sharing these unique perspectives from all around.
Yeah, and something I wanted to mention about the Women's Work show, so any of the fine art, so sculpture and any of the 2D work, with the exception of there's a few pieces that include fiber and wood, have to portray an actual woman at work, so a human figure. With the traditional arts, or like traditional cowboy arts, the traditional indigenous arts, they do not have to portray a woman. For one, the media can sometimes be very challenging to make a woman in leather, for example. It can be very hard.
I can't do it,
so,
and some people can.
Yeah, so they were allowed to have more symbolism, and so if you want to actually hear it more in depth, that same podcast for Cowgirl Artists of America's podcast, Morgan and her sister Andrea talk about the work behind these boots and why they chose grass to symbolize the work that her sister does.
And here's Megan's.
So here's mine. So this is my cousin Morgan. Morgan and I grew up together. She's a little younger than me. Her dad ran a cattle ranch for a long time, and my favorite thing in the whole world was to go out and help them with cattle in the summer, because we grew up with horses. I did the horse side of things, but I loved going out and helping them in the summer on the cattle ranch. So we grew up, I remember riding horses along these dirt road mile sections out in Oklahoma, just talking about little kids, what little kids do, talking about all their dreams. And so it was really special for me to be able to use something that I had since as a passion since I was a kid in the art, and to portray her. She's a horse trainer now, and I intended to do 2 pieces, and I misremembered in all of my having to deal with everything, and I misremembered the size, so I couldn't enter my second piece because it was too large, but it showed her on training a colt. But this piece is a little bit more on the symbolic side. Obviously, typically you're not throwing a rope while your horse is standing still unless you're just practicing, but this is just a 2-year-old horse. It's called, he's a little past Greenbrook, but Greenbrook is where they're still a little new to being ridden. They might be a little bit spooky. But so she's throwing this rope here, and I named this piece simply Cowgirl, because the internet's a fun place, but I had a conversation with a guy. He wrote this poem about, it was called Don't Call Her Cowgirl, and the whole poem was based around, if a cowgirl is like a good hand, you should call her a cowboy, because that's
actually a poem by a woman.
No, well, this is a different one.
Oh, okay. There's also one by a woman.
Well, unless he
which is
plagiarized
even more
it, but hopefully
offensive.
not.
Yeah.
And it was a lovely poem, and I appreciated the sentiment of what he was saying. But again, we're not seeing cowgirls. And if I tell you, oh yeah, that cowboy down the road is a good hand with horses, you immediately assume it's a man. And I want us to I want women to be proud of this title. It doesn't mean, there's all these kind of offensive terms in the West that are relating to cowgirls, and I want us to be able to proudly say, I am a cowgirl, whatever that means to you. And this picture, I think, just it kind of sums that up for me, because my cousin is just so great with horses. She has this really great approach with them. She's very easy with them, and and she gets really good results. And so when you come to the show, if you come, I built a frame for the first time, and it actually has this rope inlaid in it. So the frame itself is part of the story of the work.
And so we wanted to talk a little bit about the back end of the show. This was one of the most exceptionally difficult events I have ever produced in my life. And we both have experience putting things together, putting events on, organizing, and this was a lot. And so this screenshot was actually my screen one day last week as we were editing the catalog, as I was writing questions to ask and finalizing documents and that kind of stuff. And this is just on the tail end. We have been meeting bi-weekly for a year and a half, and a lot of weeks, at least once a week or twice a week, to try to put this together. And I don't know that either of us anticipated that it was going to be this much work, but gathering 54 women all over the country and then 54 ranchers all over the country, and coordinating with the A.R. Mitchell Museum in another state. And I guess you came in the fall. I came here today at 1:30, and so there were just these endless layers of complications that I don't think we anticipated. But this was a labor of love for us, and as I keep saying, the layers of storytelling within this body of work are truly exceptional, as well as the art being exceptional. It is just a really spectacular group of women who made this happen.
Yeah, I feel like this tiny little seed of I guess another takeaway, do the thing. Whatever's in your head right now, go do it. Because even if it's hard, and even if it flops, like, oh well, go do it. Because you might end up with something that turned out like 5,000 times better than you imagined. And I think that's how this show was, and it's only because of people like Morgan and Allison and Lisa and Cassie and Isabel coming to help. It really get your team. Get your team of women. You can conquer the world.
That does make a difference.
But men are good too. No, we love the men that support us.
Yes,
they are very supportive.
Our men folk have been very supportive of this project as well.
Well, I say that Pete is the biggest funder of CGA. So no, we really appreciate the men. But a group. What is that quote? A group of. Oh shoot! I wish I didn't think of it until just this moment. There's a quote basically about a group of determined women can basically accomplish anything.
Yeah, burn it down.
It's true, I think. And next year will be easier, right?
Next year will be easier, yeah. Well, thank you, and I think we have some time for questions.
We absolutely do.
Thanks for coming to Trinidad. How did you choose the A.R. Mitchell Museum for the show?
That was another great, our networks are so important, and Peggy Judy, you've probably seen her work if you've gone to the A.R. Mitchell. She connected Cody and I, and he was like, hey, we want to do a show with your group, and I was like, well, I kind of have this really crazy idea that I want to run by you, and he was all about it, and the museum has been incredibly supportive and excited about it. So.
And we haven't made him cry too many times.
But we're in love with Trinidad now that we've been here, and the A.R. Mitchell is obviously just incredible people, incredible space too, so.
Are you guys going to take the show anywhere else?
No, the plan is for here.
Here.
Yeah, and for long-term doing, we've got, plans next August. Mark a calendar.
Yeah, we are open for submissions right now, so any of you who are practicing artists and identify as women, please submit an application.
Yeah, and September 30th, same day as the show for the call. Yeah, and it's not work that is already, it's work you can have sold. It can be done, whatever. It just has to be no more than 2 years old.
Any other questions?
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank
what
you.
a fantastic.